One. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry we're a few minutes late. Technical difficulties do be difficult, but it's another wonderful evening. In the words of our good friend Joshua, let's go. Let's get this episode underway and let's get started. I am the Daily Cow's Jasper, Kenzo, Sundeen.
I'm Emily Ohman.
And we are here for another episode of Bear Dash. The football season is over, but we're still here. We're still going. There's still a ton to talk about. The NFL draft is just around the corner. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know the NFL playoffs are not around the corner. They are on the street right now. And a very special Cal alumni, Aaron Rodgers, is tearing it up. And for our first segment, we're going to look a little bit beyond both those events and all the way to next season. We talked a lot about last season. We'll continue to talk a lot about last season because it's the off season. But we're going to take a second and throw some darts at the future. A lot of news right now. Cal secured a 4-star quarterback, not for 2021, but for 2022 in Jalen Martin. And then backup quarterback Devon Modster announced his entrance into the transfer portal. He was the Bears' backup QB. He's started a couple games in the last 2 seasons. And he's just the latest Cal player to hit the transfer window. If you want to know more about some personnel changes, please check out Shaylin and I's episode last week. But for now, we're going to start this episode off with just a little bit of guesses about what Cal's going to look like next year. And to start that off, like I said, there's been changes at quarterback. Emily, who do you think replaces Monster at the QB2? Who's Cal's new number 2 at quarterback?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. I love doing postseason stuff because it gives us a chance to talk about things that normally we really don't have the time to talk about. So I'm super excited to be doing these kind of too early prediction type things. But for me, I think that Spencer Brash is the shoe-in for the QB2 role. He's a current redshirt freshman. He had his first and only start at Utah in 2019 because Chase Garbers, the first-string quarterback, was out with an injury. He's also the first true freshman Cal quarterback to start since Jared Goff, which is pretty interesting. And although that Utah game was rough to say the very least, Cal was shut out for the first time since 1999 with a 35-0 stomping that the Utes gave them. It wasn't necessarily Brash's fault. The receivers weren't getting open. He had a ton of defensive pressure on him and very little time in the pocket. The defense had one of the worst games in recent memory. And there were actually a few plays of the opening drive that weren't that bad. Brash himself looked pretty mobile. But statistically, there's really not much to go off of. He went 7 for 19 that night. He had a career-long 12-yard pass. He threw an interception. It's a really mixed bag. But what I see here that's really important is the fact that he has real experience against one of the biggest players in the conference that year. Utah went on to win the Pac-12 South. They finished the season nationally ranked. So I think it was a huge amount of pressure for Brash. But he really held his own against an absolute behemoth of a team. And I think that experience alone gives him a huge leg up on redshirt sophomore Robbie Wallow for the second string position. So I'm interested who you think might get the second string job.
Yeah. Like you said, there's not a lot to go by. Modster and Garbers have taken a lion's share of the reps over the last couple seasons. You just mentioned them, though. Robbie Roll is my guy. I think he's been with this program a year longer than Brash, and Brash has put in a lot of work over the last couple off seasons. We've seen that. But Roll has been with this team for a while. Like I said, 3 seasons. And if you thought there wasn't a lot to go off of with Brash, statistically speaking, there's even less with Roll. He's had, I think, 2 pass plays. He played a little in that same game against Utah. 13 yards total, a couple runs. I mean, it's nothing. Not even drops in a bucket, like molecules of water in the bucket. It's nearly impossible to tell. And that's what makes this difficult. Over the last 2 years, even when Garbers was injured, Modster had a lion's share of the reps, and he's really the only other guy we've seen a lot of. But I do think just because Roll's been there, this season there were several times when he was dressing for games and Brash wasn't. He was dropped behind freshman Zach Johnson for that 3rd or 4th string spot. So Roll just seems like a guy the coaching staff trusts a little more. He's a little more experienced. But I do think the wild card here is that this is a new offensive coordinator. This is a new system. We saw the Bears struggle with that offensively at points. And obviously, a lot of the talk has been about Chase Garbers, right? How can he adjust? I mean, he's the guy that needs to fit, that needs to get the ball to his receivers because he's Cal's starter until he leaves, I think. but it's really anyone's ball game from there on out. It's whoever is able to fit in the system and impress Musgrave. And there's a lot of guys who can do that. I think Roll may have an edge because of his experience, but like you said, Brosh is the only other guy on this roster who started a game at quarterback. Zach Johnson, I said, had a couple appearances in uniform. He never stepped on the playing field, but he was warming up. Jaden Casey is a guy who's really excited me. Another freshman last year who redshirted a season, but he's flashed some potential in practices and at the high school level. And then, of course, Kai Milner is a four-star quarterback out of Arizona who's going to be a freshman this upcoming season. He's a guy who will definitely get a look and who Musgrave had a hand in recruiting. So I think that makes it a toss-up, but I kind of disagree with you there. I think Roll may have a slight edge, but who knows? Rolling right along with some predictions, though, we each have a couple for you. We're going to throw you a dead guarantee. Each of us has a prediction we think will absolutely happen. Something we're not so sure about, something we're on the fence about, maybe something a little wild, and then a completely spicy hot take. I've had a notorious one. I won't have anything good this time, I promise. You might have to wait a little bit, tune in over the next couple of weeks, but we're going to have three for you. Emily, get us started. What do you guarantee that Cal football is going to be able to do next season? What is a set in stone, words on the mountain guarantee?
Well, this might sound like a cop-out at first, but my guarantee for the 2021 season is that Cal will have a much better record than 1-3. I think that there were just so many things that you could blame the losses on, and that Cal itself wouldn't, admit. I think that a lot of the players, when we interviewed them after games, especially those 3 losses out of the 4 games that they played this season, they were like, that's on us. Although there are a lot of extraneous circumstances, they always were the first to step up and take that blame. But I really think that the record was not an indication of the strength of the team whatsoever. Even just looking at like the season opener against UCLA, they had to travel on about a day's notice. They were missing tons of starters due to the one positive test that resulted in a whole lot of quarantining for other players. It was an opponent that they didn't prepare for. Did prepare for. So without these factors, I think that the Bears will have just a lot smoother sailing. This isn't to say that there won't be obstacles, but I think that there'll be a lot less of them. And I think the record's going to look a little bit better than 1-3.
If I was a betting man, I would put money down in the same place. I mean, Cal was a handful of, if you think about it, Cal was maybe a handful of plays against Oregon State and Stanford from a Pac-12 championship game. And that's the product of a 4-game season, right? It does take a handful of plays, but it does seem like the Bears are primed to bounce back in a big way, especially because we talked about this last week. So many defenders are returning. My guarantee is a little different, though. I'm talking about a specific player. Mueller Iosefa stepped on the field a handful of times. He had just a handful of tackles and a handful of starts this season. He was a true freshman, though, and I think after just 2 games, he was put at the top of the depth chart for Cal's games against Oregon and Washington State. And that says a lot. He's competing with guys like Coin Dang and Evan Tattersall for minutes. And those are 2 really experienced veteran players. And Iosefa is coming in as a freshman and shooting right up there. He had a fumble recovery against Oregon, which was a game-clinching play. I think he is the next big thing at linebacker for Cal. You and I both know this. Cal is a great team when it comes to linebackers. They produce great linebackers. There are no slackers in that department. Evan Weaver, Devontae Downs, Coin Dang has turned it on. He's going to get drafted whenever he enters the draft. But Mueller Iosefa is the next big thing. Evan Tattersall is a guy that has a ton of experience. He's really important to this team. But you hear about the way Iosefa approaches games. Next season is going to be a breakout year for him. A lot of guys are going to be on Coin Dang, and a lot of that attention is also going to get sucked up by Iosefa.
I love doing these kinds of predictions because although there are so many question marks, like there's also so many exciting things and even guarantees, like you said, to look forward to. For my not so sure about this one, but definitely could happen, I'm going to just go out there and say that I think that Cal is going to take the axe back. I think that the big game is something that all of the players took very personally this season. to be honest, and I also got a lot of flack for this opinion during and after the Stanford game. I think that Cal was the better team, and that the end result was due to a whole bunch of bad luck. Yes, there of course were errors made by the Bears. There was the muffed punt in the first half. There was the blocked field goal that wasn't even the blocked field goal that keeps me up at night and haunts me. I mean, 2 blocked kicks is kind of ridiculous. The Bears had really poor field position at the onset of every drive, and I honestly think that it was dumb luck that buried the Bears in that game, because Stanford was really not the better team unless we're comparing special teams units alone. Ryan Sanborn obviously had an incredible game, but I think that the Bears know that. I think that they were all really emotionally worn down after that game, especially considering the myriad of hoops they had to jump through, just to play at all that season. Rigorous COVID testing, not using the locker rooms, practicing with limited on-field capacity, even, taking all of these precautions just to have entire position groups out because of contact tracing. I think that had a lot to do with the big game loss. 3 starters on the offensive line were out. The defensive line was running on only 2 full weeks of practice, and Cal's starting running back, Christopher Brown Jr., was injured. So I think that if, like I said before, if you take COVID and you take the contact tracing out of the equation, I think Cal would have had their way with the Cardinal. A lot of seniors like Joshua Drayden and Coin Dang, like you mentioned, Cam Good, they're all returning under the banner of unfinished business. And I know that they're really talking in part about the big game. So I think under more predictable circumstances, they're not going to let the axe slip through their fingers again.
Yeah, and we've also talked about this a lot, but it definitely felt more like a game that Cal lost and Stanford won. The Bears outgained the Cardinal in a lot of facets of the game. They were better. It is a game that really adds to the lore of the rivalry, though. I mean, the Stanford players taking that photo in front of the Cal bleachers. A blocked extra point like that, it does not get any more intense than that. I will add a little side guarantee here. Emily's out here with me. Maybe Cal can get this back. I will guarantee you the Daily Cal will beat the Stanford Daily in the Ink Bowl next year. A little friendly rivalry between publications, but the Daily Cal's got 4 years running. Drubbed them in the virtual Ink Bowl this season, and I don't see any reason why we can't do it again. So for all you Stanford listeners out there, for all you Stanford Daily listeners out there, if there are any of you, you will lose again. Have fun. But for my not so sure prediction, a Cal offensive player has never been drafted during Justin Wilcox's tenure. And that's no surprise. Wilcox is a defensive guy. He's produced some of the best defenses in the country. The Takers unit is well known. NFL talent there, aplenty. But a Cal offensive player has never been drafted. I think a Cal offensive player will be drafted next season. You're seeing a crop of upperclassmen that have now been with this team for a while. They're going to have a full season to impress in Musgrave's offense. And this prediction takes a dent without a guy like Mekhi Polk, but Garbers, if he can put together a consistent year, definitely draftable. Christopher Brown Jr. was injured, but we both know the guy is insanely talented and an absolute machine when it comes to running the football. And the Bears are going to have a load of offensive linemen who could look to the draft should they want to. Coupled with veterans like Kekoa Crawford and Nico Remigio, should they choose to come back next season. The Bears have a ton of players that, even as late-round draft picks, could be very tantalizing to the NFL.
Yeah, and I'm also really excited to get into our discussion of the Pro Bears that we've got planned for later in this episode. I think that's actually really interesting. I'm excited to share my predictions for one of the declared players, Jake Curhan, who's an offensive lineman. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up, if anywhere, because there are so many things up in there, especially when it comes to the NFL draft. It's always a very interesting, spectacle to observe. Are you ready for my hot and spicy take?
Lay it on us.
Okay, it's definitely not as hot as yours, your infamous take. But maybe I'm just saying it because it'll be our senior year and, maybe the most poetic thing of all time. But I think that Cal has a chance at the Pac-12 North, if not the entire conference crown. And I say this because 3 standout players at Oregon have already declared for the draft. And while, they certainly have a strong season without some of those players, I think that Cal has the depth to give them a run for all of their money next season, not just in one game. I also say this because Cal's win over Oregon was easily the best game they had all season, and perhaps one of the best showings in recent memory, since it was such a complete and strong game by the Bears in a season where there are so many things that were flukes. The big game, Cal's win over Oregon was because they were firing on all cylinders. They were hot. They were shutting down the Ducks' biggest weapons. We talked about this a couple times before, but Cam Good had 7 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 3.5 tackles for loss, which is just, mind-boggling. In addition to a forced fumble recovery in the fourth quarter, the entire defense just plugged up Oregon's rush game, like vacuum sealed it. They were just so airtight in the backfield, except for like 1 or 2 plays. 2 of Good's tackles for loss were against Oregon's CJ Friedel and Travis Dye, who just dominated the Pac-12 rushing leaderboard for like the entire season. And the Bears executed, and they were strong, and they had long drives downfield, and they answered all of Oregon's offensive plays with like resounding confidence. So also it helped that special teams didn't ruin anything. But looking at that game alone, if the Bears can play like that for most of the season, which I think they definitely can, because the circumstances will be so different, I believe that Cal can take the Pac-12 North for themselves, and also, depending on how the South shapes up, maybe even the conference title itself. I think it really helps that set pieces like Dang and Jaden and Good will be back. Obviously, the losses of Jay Curhan and Deande Johnson, and especially Cameron Bynum, they definitely leave some question marks, but not much is changing for the Bears, especially defensively. So I think they have a great chance of seriously contending with the big dogs of the Pac-12 next year, despite the 1-3 record that they posted in 2020.
Yeah. So there you have it, folks. It's not me this season. So far, it's Emily who's making some crazy hot takes, but there it is. It's not the CFP. It's only the Pac-12. So we'll see. I'll keep it short, keep it simple. We got to move right on here. But my hot take, you mentioned Cam Good. He had a monster year. I think Cam Good, he leads the conference in sacks. He almost did it a couple seasons ago. He was behind just 2 players. Both those guys are going to be gone to the NFL. He came back. We've been saying this all evening. You've been saying it all evening. He's here because he has unfinished business. He was phenomenal in just 4 games in 2020. There's no reason he can't do that in 2021 and finally get the national attention that he deserves. So that's my hot take. Cam Good leads the conference in sacks. And our good friend Jesse is reminding us in the live chat, yes, somewhere there is a video of me claiming that Cal will make the CFP. You can look at the results and judge for yourself how well that went. But please hit us up with questions, comments, and concerns, though leaving my personal history of failure out of it might be nice. Thanks, Jesse. Moving right on, Emily mentioned it. We're going to talk a little bit about the draft, specifically this season. Cam Bynum is a lock, but Emily, you mentioned Jay Kern, so why not start there? What do his draft prospects look like? Where could he end up?
So I think that, what I like to do is I like to fantasize about where these people, theoretically could end up. I know that, like you said, there hasn't been an offensive player drafted under Justin Wilcox's tenure, which is super interesting. Jay Curhan is an offensive lineman, and he's been really great for the Bears. I really don't think that he will get taken super high in the draft, but I do think that he's a super strong player that could get scooped up in later rounds or even do some sort of free agency signing. I think that he has the kind of consistency and talent and stamina that NFL teams like to see. I think that it would be undeniably like the coolest thing ever to see him blocking for Joe Burrow with the Bengals. I think that would give me just like immense joy. The Bengals allowed Burrow to get sacked 32 times in just 10 games in the 2020 season, and they really need to bolster their offensive line. So I think that'd be, that's my dream spot where I would put him if I could. He's smart. He reads the field well. And one of the only things that kept Cal and quarterback Chase Garbers afloat in a 2019 season in which the O-line was just in, absolute tatters due to injury. So like I said, I'd love to see him go there. I can't imagine he'd go that high in the draft. The Bengals will be doing some serious recon along with a lot of other teams. The Giants, the Jets, the Panthers kind of come to mind as people who could benefit from an extra player, a little bit more depth here and there. The same with the Washington football team. They'll be looking for a little bit more strength on the O-line, so they could take him in a late round. otherwise, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me to see him go undrafted and then get scooped up as a free agent by one of those later teams that I mentioned. But he has shown a lot of resilience in his many years with Cal, and that he can work up, from redshirting into just being a key facet and a key player for the Bears. So I think that there is potential for him to get taken eventually. I think that whatever team that gets him would be lucky, considering he's, not somebody that I guess a lot of people are watching, but I think he does have a lot of NFL level talent that would be put to good use.
Yeah, he definitely does. He's been very consistent, and the Bengals need help on the O-line. Another team, though, that's really struggled with injuries at that position are the Eagles. I could see Kern ending up in Philly really for that reason. He's been Mr. Consistent. He has not missed a lot of games. He's been very healthy. And the Eagles have had a lot of problems at O-line with exactly that issue. Guys are getting injured. Philly's a little thin at the position. The Eagles do not have the cap space to go out and sign free agents. So picking up a guy like Kern as an undrafted free agent, I think, could be a really good move for a team like the Eagles. And like you said, he's a really great guy, great vision, a leader for this Cal football team, and it's tough to evaluate offensive line talent. So he's a dude who could sneak in as a late round pick or as an undrafted free agent and be a difference maker on an NFL team. But another potentially late round undrafted free agent guy we haven't talked about yet is Deande Johnson. He's the second Bear to declare for the NFL draft. He's a defensive lineman, years of service at Cal. I think he's a 6-year senior. Emily, he doesn't put up the biggest stats, but he is a guy with the big heart. Where could you see him working in the NFL?
I think that my dream pick for him would be the Bills, because they certainly need a better pass rush. They've allowed 812 yards in the postseason alone, which is, the second most out of the 14 teams that actually made the playoffs. I feel like he could shine there in the spotlight, and my mom's a Georgia girl, so I grew up a Georgia Bulldogs fan, and I'd love to see Deande out there after Jake Fromm, maybe in a couple years. Obviously, the Bills are having a Cinderella story season, and likely to be very competitive for years to come. I love the franchise. So that's my daydream. I realize that is extremely unlikely to happen. I think that there are lots of teams looking to rebuild their defenses. The New York Jets, like we mentioned, the Bengals, the Miami Dolphins as well. So I think that he might have a lot of teams vying for him, like you said, like a late round or undrafted signing. I honestly think the Dolphins could be interesting because Patrick Laird, a former Cal running back, currently plays for Miami. Gerald Alexander is also the DB's coach at Cal. He now coaches for the Dolphins. So I think that there's ties and connections between the two programs that could allow him to be snagged late in the draft by Miami. The same goes for the Jets, where former Bears safety Ashton Davis now plays. I think that they could get him late. But, you mentioned Mr. Consistency. Deande Johnson is all the same. I don't think he's missed a game since 2018, which is, no small feat, especially given the circumstances this year. And I think that being resilient in a season that looked like 2020's shows that he's got the kind of gumption that NFL teams are looking for.
Yeah, you mentioned the Dolphins. That's where my mind goes. A team that needs a little help on defense, and there's no sort of direct connection. Gerald Alexander, former Cal DB's coach, is coaching the defensive backs for the Dolphins. He's garnered a lot of praise. Obviously, he's not in charge of the defensive line, so he's not making any decisions there. But there's definitely a little like, hey, I know this guy, you know this guy, let's make it work. And like you said, Patrick Laird has not been a standout performer. He has not been an all-star with the Dolphins, but he's been consistent. He's been there when the team has needed it. He's been a hard worker. I think folks in Miami might be putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that a lot of smart, hardworking guys are coming out of the East Bay, and they could snag another one with Deande Johnson. The final Cal player who's declared for the NFL draft, and the guy who's really just a deadlock. We've talked about some late round undrafted free agent scenarios for other Bears, but Cam Bynum is going before the end of the 4th round. He's fallen a little on draft boards these last couple weeks, but he's an undeniable talent. We've known for years that he's going to get drafted, and he's got loads of potential. Emily, where do you see him fitting best, given that he is probably going to be taken off the board?
Well, I have to agree with you. I'd say 3rd or 4th round for Bynum for sure. He clearly also has consistency. I think that the good news for him is that so many teams are looking for cornerbacks. I see him ending up at a place that already has a strong defense, but could add a piece or two to the rotation just to really solidify it. I think the Cowboys don't really need to prioritize a secondary, but could use some depth. So could the Colts, which would be really cool, and definitely a long-term investment for them. Even the Raiders are in kind of the same boat where it's not like a bloodlet every game, but a few big plays will hurt them, like how we saw late in the season with Las Vegas. So I think it'd be cool to see him maybe go local, either the 49ers or the Rams. But I mean, with so many doors open for Bynum, it's really hard to tell where he'll land at. But I agree with you. I'm very confident he'll go pretty high. I am excited to see wherever he does end up. I think that he'll thrive there and have a really great time.
Yeah. One team, and I'm not sure this is the most fantastic fit, but this could be a bit of a prediction. The Cleveland Browns have 4 picks at the end of the 3rd and beginning of the 4th round. I think it's within 10 picks. The Browns have 4 of them. And that's an opportunity to just take a lot of talented guys. Bynum could be one of them. And I like that fit because he's not going into a team where he has to be the number 1 dude right off the bat. He can sit behind a guy like Denzel Ward. He can learn a lot. Teams are a little worried about his athleticism. And he'll have a chance to get some of that fitness, work at a pro level, and learn from some pro guys and some really great players like Denzel Ward and like the secondary unit that the Browns have. And so that maybe not the perfect fit for him, but maybe good in some ways and a better prediction going forward. We've talked about some guys who could be in the NFL in the future, but before we go, let's touch on a few guys who are in the NFL now. Aaron Rodgers is leading the Packers to an NFC Championship game. We'll talk more about him in a second, but Emily, can you just run down a couple of Cal alumni and how they've done in the playoffs this season?
Yeah, it's been really exciting and fun to watch so many pro Bears just out there doing really impressively and just having a great season. Although some of them, their seasons have come to an end. Patrick McCarry, who's a Ravens center, they played the Buffalo Bills last weekend, vying for a spot in the AFC Championship. And unfortunately, this season ended for Baltimore in the form of a 17-3 loss. And unfortunately, in the final minutes of the game, McCarry snapped it over Lamar Jackson's head, which resulted in a concussion for Jackson. It was really, super heartbreaking to watch. Just a really, truly saddening way to go out, not only for him, but for Baltimore. But I still think it was really impressive to see McCarry out there getting starts with the Ravens and overall doing a really impressive job on that offensive line. And speaking of the Buffalo Bills, Davis Webb, who was a quarterback for the Bears in 2016 as a graduate transfer, he played all 12 games of the season and had a 61.6 completion rate. He really kind of took Berkeley by storm. He's currently on the practice squad for the Bills. And Mitchell Schwartz, who was the number 37 overall pick in the 2012 NFL draft, is also on the Kansas City injured reserve. The Chiefs won their matchup against the Browns this weekend, and so they'll face off against the aforementioned Bills in the AFC Championship. So it's pretty cool to know that so many pro Bears are out there thriving in the postseason. It's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, Schwartz is a guy who could appear in the Super Bowl should the Chiefs make it that far. 2 other Bears saw their seasons come to an end. Jared Goff is well known by the Berkeley faithful. He's had a bit of a tough season with the Rams, up and down. Rode the bench for a first playoff game, came back, helped the Rams beat the Seahawks in an upset, but was not up to it against his fellow alumni Aaron Rodgers in the divisional round. Cam Jordan was upset by Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. He did not have a vintage season. He's a guy who's put up some amazing numbers the last couple of years. This was not quite it for him, but he's still an outstanding player, and I'm sure he'll be back with a vengeance. But the man of the hour right now is Aaron Rodgers. He's really likely to win MVP, I think. Who knows until it's all said and done. But Emily, is Aaron Rodgers the greatest Cal football alumni at this point? I mean, is there anyone who's better?
Well, I think that what makes this question so hard to answer is the wealth of talent that Cal has turned out over the years. I mean, in my short life, and as someone who has not been a religious follower of football since exiting the womb, like some Cal or just football fans in general, there are names that come to mind when I think of Cal's greatest. There's Keenan Allen, wide receiver, 4 times Pro Bowler, and Cal's all-time leader with 205 receptions. There's Marshawn Lynch, who is hands down the best golf cart driver in history. Herm Edwards, Ron Rivera, all of these names are just people that I've seen do great things in my lifetime. And I know that there are so many more, and these names, only scrape the surface. There's Tony Gonzalez, Deshaun Jackson, Joe Cap. The list goes on and on and on. But to answer your question, I do believe that Aaron Rodgers is the best Cal football alum because of something that I talked a lot about at the beginning of this episode, which is consistency. With the Bears, Rodgers set the records for the lowest single season and career interception rate at the school. In the NFL, he's only prolifically improved. He led the league 5 times in lowest passing interception percentage, 5 times in touchdown to interception ratio, 3 times in total touchdowns and passer rating, and many, many other things that I don't want to bore you with because we could talk about stats all day, which he dominates. But another element of greatness for me, as well as consistency, is what a player is like off the field. And last fall, I had a really amazing opportunity to feature a graduate transfer defensive lineman. His name was Ben Hochschreider. He was born and raised in Berkeley, grew up on Cal football. It was really it was his obsession. It was his greatest passion. He's just a fiend for it. He'd go to games with his family. He'd wait at the tunnel to high-five players. And he has a lot of heartwarming stories about how kind the players were to him. Burl Toller III, who's the current wide receivers coach at Cal, he was a player when Schreider was young, and he just loved seeing this kid come to practices. So he'd hang out with him, and he'd always go out of his way to say hi. The players were super endearing with him. But one story that he told me just stood out to me. He said that he was in the locker room hanging out with all the players, and he was just, chilling with the guys. And he invited some of the players to dinner at his house. And he came out of the locker room and told his dad, like, hey, I gave Aaron Rodgers your number. Make arrangements for dinner. And his dad was like, yeah, trying to temper his expectations a little bit. But he said that they didn't even walk out of the stadium before he got a call saying that they wanted to talk dates. And I think it's that same quality of a character as well as play and the consistency of both that make Rodgers the greatest in Cal history. I think it's evident not only in that, but in the 7-figure donation he made to Cal in 2019, not only to make a new locker room, but to set up a scholarship. I think he really cares about his community in Green Bay and also the Bay. I think he remembers what the Cal program gave to him, which is remarkable. I think that he can garner so much success and still reflect back. And of course, he has the numbers to back it up. I love that he's stuck with this franchise at Green Bay. Of course, I'm a Packers fan myself. This episode is the I'm from Utah, so I get to pick teams like the Georgia Bulldogs and the Green Bay Packers because Utah has no sports edition. But he does all of this with the most humble attitude that I love, and I love watching him play. And I think it makes him easily the most standout player in school history. I don't think it takes away from the success of others, nor the golf cart driving skills of Marshawn Lynch, but I do think it makes him the golden boy of the Golden Bears for sure.
It's hard to argue with any of that. Rodgers has been a dominant force at Cal and at Green Bay, from one Bay to another, as you said. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Unfortunately, folks, that's all the time we have this week. Check out Aaron Rodgers and the Packers this Sunday. They'll try to punch their ticket to another Super Bowl. But until then, stay safe, enjoy life, and have a good time. In the words of our good friend, Justice De Los Santos, stay hydrated. And that's all, folks.